everyone. Welcome to the session on ableism and ableist remarks, what you need to know. For all those who have been attending these sessions, this session particularly is very, very special to me because of the reason that there must be so many friends that I would have had who wanted to ask me questions but could not ask. And today they'll find answers. Also, there are many students who have come to me or to others asking, how do we approach? What do we say? How do we say? So we're looking forward to get answers to all those questions, how to talk to and about persons with disabilities. Now, the name of the topic is interesting, ableism. Now, it's not a very common term. Not as common as compared to sexism or racism. The only reason, first let me tell you what ableism is. Ableism in simple terms would be discrimination or prejudice against persons with disabilities. Now, ableism, when you think of why it's not so common, the only reason I can think of is it's the last of those things to be added in the paradigm. So first we had white male that was recognized as a paradigm. Then heterosexual got added to it, which means anything that's beyond the paradigm is considered not normal, abhorred at, or it's not mainstream. Then in case of India, of course, caste, upper castes also got added. Ability came at the end. So white, heterosexual, able-bodied male. This paradigm came quite recently. Perhaps for this reason, the discourse around disability is not as developed as it would be, say, with gender or with race. Maybe that's the reason why even Article 15 and 16 don't recognize discrimination only on grounds of ability. So as we see, this is quite new and it's important to talk about it. That's why today we are having this session. And I can go on and on, but I'm very excited to hear from our speakers what they have to say on this. So let me quickly start the session. For those who want to pin the video, I have pinned the video of the Indian Sign Language interpreters. We have Surbhi, ISL, and Manisha Sharma. You can pin their video by clicking on the upper right-hand side corner. You'll see 3 dots. You just have to click that. You'll get the option of pin this video and you can pin that video. I have also put this information in the chat box. You also have captioning options, so you can also pin captioner's video as well. So thank you so much everyone for joining. Our first speaker is Antara Telang, and I'm very excited to introduce her. She's a communication specialist. In her free time, she backpacks, she illustrates, she's an amazing illustrator, and she posts feminist comments on Facebook posts. So people should better be careful. So over to you, Antara, whenever you're ready. Like, it's been such a long time since I have been wanting to have you. She was first in Bombay, then she's in Bangalore, she's never in Delhi, and I keep messaging her every year, look, whenever you're in Delhi, let's do something. So here you are, Antara, over to you.
Thank you. It's very rare that I get the opportunity to feel like a celebrity, and Sanchita always makes me feel like one, so that's thanks. So I'll just start with a brief introduction to myself, because everybody, unlike Sanchita, does not know who I am. So about 10 years ago, when I was 18, I was in an accident. It was pouring heavy rain in Bombay, typical Bombay monsoon style. And as I was walking on the road, a branch of a tree fell on me and I passed out. And the next thing I remember is that I woke up in a hospital room about half an hour or 1 hour later with my right leg completely crushed. My right ankle was completely crushed and my leg had to be amputated. So, for the first 18 years of my life, I had considered myself normal. And now, suddenly, at the age of 18, I fell under the category of being disabled. And it didn't really matter how much I denied it or what my personal opinion about it was. I just legally fell into a different category now. I needed a lot of different certificates and permissions to do simple things like getting a driver's license, or things that other people can do without much hassle. So over the last 10 years, I've collected a variety of reactions in a variety of spheres just by virtue of being a person with a disability. And what I'm going to do quickly in the next couple of minutes is just lay down a few rules that you can keep in mind while interacting with somebody who has a disability. So, the first and the most important rule is that we are not inspiring. We are not here to inspire you. It is really irritating when people call us brave or inspirational just because they find out that we have a disability. Um, we do not know what anyone around us has gone through. There may be much braver people in our midst who are not disabled. Um, it definitely, when you do have a disability, you do undergo systemic sort of, there are issues that you face and it is hard to live with it for sure, but that does not justify a stranger calling you brave. So that is the first thing. The second rule is that you shouldn't be patronizing. It is when you show us a reaction of surprise or shock, that when you see a person with a disability leading a normal life, climbing a few steps, working a normal job, going to college, it you're saying something like, you know why are you doing this? You don't need to do this. You can just instead take a cab. Why are you using public transport? Just comments like that are really patronizing. And it there are people with disabilities who need help physically sometimes, and if you offer help to a person who has a disability and they turn it down, you should know that you shouldn't keep asking again and again. If they do need your help, they will accept your offer. And if you make a big deal out of it, even if I need your help and you are a stranger and I'm asking you for it, it has taken a lot of swallowing of pride. You should know that. So if you make a big deal out of it, the chances are the next time I need help, I might not ask somebody because I'm just too embarrassed by what the whole situation around it has been. The third thing is, don't be an agony aunt unnecessarily. If you are the kind of person who tells your kids or your friends, ja Simran ja, ji le apni zindagi, then do not tell people who have disabilities, why don't you work from home? Or why don't you just do a long distance course or something like that? Um, I promise you, people with disabilities love our beds just as much as anybody else. But if we are leaving it and going somewhere, it is with good reason. When you try to reduce the scope of spaces in which disabled people can work and live their lives, um, it increases societal bias. It reduces our interaction with the everyday outside world, and it lowers our self confidence. So, just like you would with anyone else, be happy with us when we get a good opportunity in our work or for our education, and be proud of the opportunities that we want for ourselves. The fourth rule is around romance and relationships. So, if you thought all of the things that I've said till now were bad, you should see what it's like to date as a person who has a disability. Um, Potential lovers ask you really weird questions, which I will not get into right now. But the reactions don't end just with them. Because we live in India, I feel like other people have more opinions about our love lives than we do. And I think, especially on this platform, because this is a lawyer community, um, I think it's really important to acknowledge the systemic societal issues that women with disabilities specifically face. Um, it Women with disabilities are constantly told, that your disability is something to be ashamed of. It is something that will hamper your prospects. That a man who you are dating, will not want to introduce you to his parents. And st- I've read a report that says that disabled women tend to be in abusive relationships twice as much as non-disabled women, which is often because they are told that they cannot do better. That you're so lucky to have landed this particular man, that if you leave him, who is going to accept you? And so it's also much harder for them to divorce or separate from their partners in that kind of a situation. So the kind of comments that I've described are at the root of that kind of ableist and abusive culture towards especially women with disabilities, but I think people with disabilities in general. I'm coming to an end soon, I promise. Rule number 5 is use the right terminology. So in general, the accepted terminology is people with disabilities, or PWDs. And that's called person first identification. So you say person, and then it's with disability, a person with a locomotor disability, or whatever you might want to classify the disability as. Most people with disabilities do not enjoy being called Divyang or specially abled. We don't actually have special abilities. That is superheroes. So that's a different webinar, I think. And there are certain communities within people with disabilities who have preferences on how they want to be referred. And so I think that while person with disability or people with disabilities is the standard term to use, I think it's good practice to generally just ask what a person, how they want to be referred to, or what they would like to be introduced or spoken to as. Um, Lastly, the 6th rule is that we are not tragedies. I know that if you're not used to it, it could be a little difficult or a little awkward to be around somebody who's different from you. You might say things that sounded better in your head. And this is something that I do pretty often, so it's understandable. But I think as a general, rule of thumb, pity is not good. And it's always best to have an open conversation about it. Everybody has their own struggles, and everybody also has their own triumphs, though. And I think a lot of people with disabilities lead very productive and full lives. And we don't need to be othered or marginalized. And Yeah, I think that's about what I wanted to say. I think you're on mute, Sanchita.
Yeah. So Antara, you made some great points. Thank you so much. Just one question. So few days back, I was trying to explain someone what's so wrong about being considered inspiring. And that made me think, what's actually wrong? Because what if somebody doesn't know what it is to be with a prosthetic leg, and they may think that you're doing something like really amazing because it must be so challenging, while there could be people who don't understand this at all and who expect you to do things and will become agony aunt and tell you, oh, why didn't you cry? Oh, you backpack. Oh, why didn't you climb Mount Everest? And you'll be like, yeah, I need to figure out a few things. No, you can do anything you want. So there are those people as well.
Yeah.
So what's the reason, or why do you think sometimes people considering you inspiring doesn't work, while sometimes you're okay about?
So I think that it's largely about who is saying it and why they are saying it. If it's coming from somebody who actually knows me and who thinks that something that I've done is, worthy of being classified that way, then okay, that wasn't really what I was referring to. What I was talking about was more when somebody meets you for the first time and this is all the information they have about you, and then basis that they're calling you inspiring. I think that is what really gets my goat, because it feels like it's easier to call me inspiring than to address the accessibility issues that exist in society right now. So then you use, I do not want to be a poster girl for how I did so much despite being disabled. I think that is the irritating thing for me.
Yeah, I wrote this at some point. It had this line कि मेरा वजूद बावजूद के मिसाल बनना नहीं है. So great, thank you so much. We'll take questions at the end. So our next speaker is Mr. Pankaj Sinha. He's a lawyer. Many of you know him very well. He has a very established practice in Delhi. So over to you, Pankaj sir, whenever you are ready.
Okay. Very good evening to all of you. My discourse will primarily focus on what sort of barriers persons with disabilities face, specifically lawyers with disability. And I will also try to give you some of the examples which we have seen in the recent past. And at the outset, although I will just be focusing on barriers, but I would also like to say that barriers are one aspect. We should also see the positive side. So I will, at the end, I will speak a little bit about the positive sides. See, if you people may recall, recently a judgment was passed, and in that judgment, it was specifically said that reading and hearing ability is required. That is why persons with visual disability and hearing impaired cannot become a judge. A very judgment which was passed did not consider that how this judgment will violate the rights of a community, because it is taking away your right. When when a judgment is passed without any research and studies, and with the observation that more hearing and reading ability is required, knowing it fully well, blind people can read, blind people can hear, knowing it fully well that with the use of sign language interpreters or with the use of technology, even hearing impaired persons can become a judge. This judgment was passed. So you see the kind of, I don't know, it is prejudice, bias of the society, or presumption of incompetence towards persons with disability. Because when a judgment is passed, a lot of things have to be taken into account. That how persons with disabilities have come into the mainstream, that should have been considered. And if this kind of judgment is passed, what right this judgment will take away? So this presumption of incompetence. Now, very strange thing that persons with disabilities can become a lawyer. They can become lawyer. They can take a judge through a voluminous and bulky files. They can do their research. They can look for judgments, but they cannot become a good judge. So this judgment, I mean, I should not make any comment, but this judgment seems very, strange, that how this judgment was passed. So this is one of the barriers, that presumption of incompetence is always attributed to persons with disabilities without any, sound justifications. And when you see this presumption of incompetence, you can imagine that how persons with disabilities how the access to justice will be ensured to persons with disabilities, which is one of the objectives in United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. On the one hand, we say that discrimination means any distinction, exclusion, or restriction which hinders your enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. And on the others, without any justification, we exclude persons with disability. So, and coupled with this fact, we also say that there should be, inclusive society where there is no specific provisions for persons with disabilities, but there should be given all the facilities which a person is enjoying in the mainstream. And on the other hand, you see this judgment. We have a very good example, but we do not take lesson from our past. We just go what we feel like. Sadhan Gupta was an Advocate General of West Bengal. He was nominated in Rajya Sabha, and thereafter we have not seen that any person with disability has ever been nominated, or there has been any provision that person with disability should be nominated in Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, wherever. Jaipal Reddy was also an orthopedically challenged person. He was also, in fact, he had contested election and he was there in Lok Sabha. So we have very good examples, but we do not take lessons from there. Apart from this, from these examples, we can certainly see that persons with disabilities have to be considered on the basis of their merits and not on the basis of their disability. Now, what kind of barriers we are having? See, when we see Women Commission, it is headed by a woman, headed by other members, and other members may be from different minority communities, but there will be no person with women with disability in that commission. So when we talk about women, interest of women with disability is completely excluded. They are neither sensitized nor understand. Child commission, people will be from different members will be from different groups, but no person with disability from any NGO or anywhere is taken. And everywhere you will see there is no person with disability. And very interesting thing is that the commissioner of persons with disability will not be a person with disability. So barrier starts from there, that how you think. This is the attitudinal barrier which we have, but we have very limited time, so I will just stop here with respect to attitudinal barrier. Now comes to access. When people with disability go to courts, I had my clients who were organizations of hearing impaired people or people with hearing impairment. I did their cases, but there were no interpreters in court. What did I argue, or what the other party argued? What was the observation of the judge? They could not understand. So they were completely dependent upon the feedback which was given by me. But they could never be the spectator. While other clients can go, they can see the proceedings. So this is another barrier. With respect to lawyers, you see any library of any court, Supreme Court, High Court, or any district courts, none of them have, the screen reading softwares. None of them have any readers who can read those books. I mean, any facility which will ensure the access to books, judgments, and all. So basically, lawyers with disabilities are doing on the basis of their own strength. Now, because time will be very less, so I will just give you an example. There was, I was reading one article by Jagdish Chandra Bose, a renowned scientist, and he said that when he was carrying out his study on plants, he grew he grew two plants. On the one side, there was a plant to whom he used to go and he used to use obscene words, and there were other plants where he used to use very good words like you are good plants, you have potential, etc., etc. And the observation of Jagdish Chandra Bose was that where he used obscene words, those people died and withered away. And when he used where he used good words, those plants flourished. They gave very good fruits, and this was his observation. So I would say that these barriers sometimes give strength to persons with disability to carve out their own way, to find out their own way. And that is why perhaps persons with disabilities have made their way, and they are doing marvelous in their own fields. If you see from history, we have seen that persons with disabilities have been treated as a very soft issue. They have been treated very soft issue, like they will be just the terms will be used which will be very patronizing. They will be given some sort of a pampering pampering, and they will be given some sort of protections and all. But persons with disabilities always fought for their rights. They got their rights, and so I would say that if we see, there were good poets like Milton. Their names are not. His name is not portrayed. Why? If persons with disabilities have to be given their place, they have to be given respect. Name of Milton should be portrayed. Ravindra Jain, a good musician again, who in fact one very good mythology when it was displayed, Ramayana. Ravindra Jain was the musician who gave the music. So I am trying to say that barriers are everywhere, but we should not treat them as barriers. We should rather see them as an opportunity to go ahead and fight against those barriers. Like as we we are fighting today against corona, we must fight against those barriers, and I'm sure we will we will succeed in this. There is a book, The Richest Man in Babylon, and that book said one thing which I remember. I read the whole book, but one very important thing which I remember, that two types of education you get. One is where you are taught, and the second one is that you learn from those teachings in your future. So persons with disabilities have to use this principle, and they have to overcome these barriers. And I think I should end with these words. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Pankaj sir, so much. Thanks for being here. Thanks for making such important comments on the issue. Very, very important. Our next speaker is Professor S. Imtiaz Hasnain. He is a professor of sociolinguistics at AMU. He was a EWC Fulbright Scholar in East-West Center, Hawaii, and senior visiting scholar at Örebro University, Sweden. He is also a recipient of President's Inspired Teachers for 2015. This is the highest recognition, civilian recognition for a university teacher for Central University. Currently, he's working on social and cultural practices of internally displaced population in multilingual spaces. His research interest includes critical discourse studies and non-dominant groups language issues. So this is why we have him today to discuss the issue of ableism. Over to you, sir.
Sir, you are actually on mute. We can't hear you. I've tried unmuting him.
I see.
Yeah.
So we can hear you now.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Sanchita. And perhaps you've given the reasons for my being here in this program today. See, I'll just take up the issue of ableism, from what is being talked about, Black Lives Matter. And when we are talking about Black Lives Matter, it's not just a question of racism, the systemic racism that is there in America, which is being protested all over the world. What is behind the racism is also an issue of language and ethnicity. And this is an important issue because the discrimination that takes place on account of ethnicity is quite stark. And I'll just take you back to a famous trial that was way back in 1979. It's called as Ann Arbor King trial. This was basically with regard to 11 Afro-American Black children. And you know, this Afro-American Black English was the English that spoken by George Floyd and all those people who represented the community, which is a Black community. And this Afro-American Black English, which is also considered to be a Black vernacular English, or simply a Black English, which is basically an ethnified form of an English, is there used by the children in this Ann Arbor Martin Luther King Junior Elementary School in Ann Arbor. And the school decided that they'll not allow the children with this background of language to continue in their schools and participate in the school curriculum. The reason was that the language that they speak is a language which is inherently weak, inherently problems that are there with it. And the problems are there because what it is basically a non-standard form of the standard English that the whites speak. Now, as a linguist, this has been thoroughly contested all over. And we as linguists have always been saying that there is nothing inherent to language, that it is weak, it is developed, or it is something which is strong. Every language is based on rule system. Language is rule-based, and every language is rule-based, be it a language of a white or a language of a Black. So the consideration that Black English speakers are linguistically weak, are intellectually deprived, are cognitively deficient, are something which have been contested, and the matter was brought to the court. And it was finally decided that this is a ridiculous assertion made by the school, depriving these people in the participation. And the affirmative judgment was passed, which said that we must uphold the diversity of the nation and the heritage of the country. And we must uphold the right of the students to their own language, which is the mother tongue. Now, this is one aspect of this discrimination that is there on account of language. But something which is strikingly rather shocking is that the harshest criticism for the Black English came from none other but the Black speakers themselves. And you have a very famous example of pound cake speech, which is basically, which has been criticized because it was given by Bill Cosby way back in 2004, in which he criticized the Black Americans for various social behaviors, and that included the way they talk. Now look at the discrimination on the basis of language. Now it is not just what we are talking about and what we are relating to the systemic racism that is being talked about all over the world. Let me take you further. I can take up examples based on my own fieldwork that has been carried out in tribal areas of Jharkhand, and even the project that Sanchita talked about with regard to the internally displaced population in Narmada, basically both Maharashtra and Gujarat. Now, let me just bring you to the very interesting film, which is called Tare Zameen Par. Now, if you look at this film, the two characters that are there, One is supposed to be a normal, within quotes, elder brother, Yuhan, and the other is Ishan, the person who is supposed to be not normal. Not normal because he's favorably disposed towards creativity, be it painting or any other kind of creativity, and he's least interested in what is happening with the studies. And what happens? The most insensitive part of the entire film is the depiction of an insensitivity of the family members towards the child suffering from this disability, which is on account of language, which has been talked about as a dyslexia. Now, we all know that this dyslexia is not just a disability with regard to reading, but it's with regard to writing, it's with regard to numbers, it's with regard to naming, with regard to even language expressions that you have. Now, what is happening? Look at the sensitivity part, which is missing in most of our meta narratives that come in the name of what is happening with the decline of education in the school system. Year after year, we have annual status of education report coming out by NGOs. This is, of course, coming out from Pratham, which is doing wonderful work. Or it could be from the National Achievement Survey, which is again doing wonderful work. And every time the report says that there is disability found among children, and the disability is to the extent that a child of class 3 is unable to read a book of class 1. A child of class 5 is unable to solve problems of class 3. I mean, these are the reports that are coming out every year. Of course, wonderful job done by the enumerators. And I'm saying that it's a wonderful job because they are bringing these things to the purview of people who really matter regarding education. Now, the problem is that in this kind of a meta-narrative, what is happening is that the profile of individuals, rather than the linguistic behavior, is being portrayed. Now, what is happening is that the enumerators do not really understand that behind the failure of the students to read, difficulties that they have in reading, the difficulties that they have in writing, behind that failure, the question is that are we really looking at what is the problem which is there of disability, which is language based? It's an umbrella term that is given that these people are unable to read or unable to write, but not going into the specific problems of the linguistic, the behavior that is there. Now, when you're looking up Tare Zameen Par, I just took up that case to tell you that this discrimination not just starts from the society, even the family is discriminating its own children, its own siblings. The elder brother believes that the younger brother is deficiently weak. And let me again talk about something with regard to the kind of a marginalization or the kind of an exclusion that takes place in the public domain of education. And I'm talking about it with reference to my own experience of working in the field. As mentioned earlier, that it is mostly in the tribal areas. And before I talk about that, let me take you further to two interesting films that were made. One was made way back in 1980 called Akrosh, which was made by Govind Nihalani. And you had the film that was basically scripted by very famous Marathi playwright, Vijay Tendulkar. And the three protagonists were there, Nasiruddin Shah, who was a public prosecutor, and Govind Nihalani, Om Puri, who was basically accused of killing his wife, Smita Patil. And despite every effort made by the public prosecutor to defend Nasiruddin, defend his case, Om Puri was unable to speak out because the language that he was able to speak was not the voice that can be heard by people. And recently you have a film which is Article 15, very aptly named Article 15, because Article 15 represents your constitutional right. And in that Article 15, which is a recent film by Anubhav Sinha, there's an interesting case of an investigation by Akash Khurana, by Ayushman Khurana, I suppose, who's heading the team investigating the rape and murder of two Dalit girls and the disappearance of the third. Now, these two cases are interesting because here the marginalized people are disadvantaged in a legal setting, in police investigations, in which only the feeblest of efforts are made by law enforcement to ensure that the suspect understands what they are being asked and what they understand their constitutional rights for a joint citizenship for India. Now, we have trampling of constitutional rights of everyday users. And this trampling, I'll take up with regard to the use of sign language. I'm sure Narayanan will be here to take up this case further. But as a linguist, I'm just bringing before you because it's an interesting occasion where a lawyer is there and there is a person who is an activist of the sign language, Narayanan, who is likely to join or may have joined. He's there. And here, language and the law provides an interesting intersection. The intersection that has a consequences on the lives of the everyday use of sign language by the people. Now, what is happening? That in an educational setup, most of the time, we are talking about the differences that are there within a language, which we use as a technical term called dialects, which is basically a term used by common people, not by linguists in a true sense of the word, because we don't believe in the social construct like a language and a dialect, because they all are basically used with a certain ulterior motive behind it. But anyway, whatever the case may be, we are talking about the rich variations in language and the everyday practical applications of such variations that can be found with regard to the educational domains. Now, this is a problem for the education, but the experience of the problem with regard to the users of sign language, the deaf people, in everyday tasks assumes immense significance, particularly if you're talking about legal settings. Why are we talking about legal settings? Because, of course, when we talked about Tare Zameen Par, or which we talked about Article 15, we do have an intervention of an asymmetrical power relationship going on. But there is also an element of a clear absence of provision of translator or interpreter, which is essential, which is there in a legal setting. And since language is an integral part of culture, and differences are always there that go hand in hand between language and culture, in the legal process, this takes a foremost position. Nowhere else do we need someone else to do our talking for us. Nowhere else are we prevented from introducing our own topics and telling our own stories in our own way. Nowhere else are we forbidden to interrupt the other speaker or ask our own questions. And nowhere else must we be ever vigilant to the language traps posed by the other side. In short, nowhere else are we prevented from using our own ideas in our own voice. We always have a voice and we articulate our voice. But there are settings where the voices are snatched away. And if this is the problematic part for an average person who is educated, you can imagine what happens with the person who is not educated and who is going to face this problem, where his voice is always silenced by the dominating voice of the other. Now, I'm a speaker of Hindi and Urdu, and I claim that Hindi and Urdu is my native language. In as much as Hindi and Urdu is my native language, even for a deaf speaker, even for a sign language speaker, sign language is his native language. It is his native language because it has its own system. It has its own rules. It is rule governed. It has its own amazing complexity and a beauty. And we have sign languages that are there, which are used by people. We have established sign languages spoken in America, which we call as American Sign Language, to the extent that they have also talked about the variations within the American Sign Language. We have sign languages spoken in Europe, and we have variations being formulated in terms of various forms of sign languages. Now, I'll just give you one interesting experience, personal experience, that way back in 2014, we organized a 4-day international Swedish-Indian multidisciplinary international research conference. This was done in our premier institute called Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore. And we had one participant from Sweden who was speaker of Swedish Sign Language. It was a harrowing experience for us because we were not able to identify one speaker of Indian Sign Language in and around Mysore, which is not very far away from Bangalore. And the problem assumed much more significance because finally, when we located one, as you know, that those who are supposed to be speakers of normal language, supposed to be, and I'm always very conscious of using this term, and they believe that they have learned a sign language as a value-added thing. Now, these people who know a sign language, they have certain stages or levels of this proficiency in the sign language. And the person who joined us to be an interpreter for the language that the participant was saying and translating it for our people who could understand it, that person had only a basic understanding of Indian Sign Language, not even an intermediate level, forget about the advanced level. Now, if you're talking about these things, these are the issues that need to be addressed as question of ableism. There's an interesting term that we talk about in case of linguistics, and that is called linguicide. Linguicide is basically what is to say that language and suicide. You're talking about a suicide on account of language because there are tribal speakers who are giving up their language. And the languages are being given up, not because there is something wrong with the language, but because this feeling that my language is worthless. And the feeling comes from the kind of an ideology that comes from the dominating language speakers, who always want to tell you that what you speak is worthless, how you speak is worthless, and what you are deprived of is because you speak a language which has got no worth in the society. And people are giving up their language because they feel that the language is of no use. And you know that the kind of a loss of language that is taking place at such a strong pace, which is witnessed all over, not just in India alone, but even abroad, is something which is alarming for all of us. Sanchita, I think I'll stop now and will give the floor to others for the reaction also.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Imtiaz, sir. It was a wonderful, wonderful talk. Let me introduce you to our next speaker, Mr.AS Narayanan. I'm very excited to introduce him. He is the president of National Association of the Deaf, and he is also a sign language rights activist. Over to you, Narayanan, sir, whenever you're ready.
Okay, can you all see me? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sanchita, for inviting me to present here for the first time. I'm pretty excited to be here. I hope you're also excited. And now that we're discussing such an important discussion, such a serious thing, we're also discussing about Indian Sign Language and its importance. You might be seeing like, so many deaf people you see, and you see that they don't have a disability since they can do anything. But I'll tell you, they have a lot of barriers. For example, when a deaf baby is born, parents don't know sign language. They don't know how to deal with it. 90% of the hearing parents have deaf kids who don't sign at all. So parents, they get worried. They don't know what to do there with their child, how the future is going to be, what the child is going to be in the future. Going back to the history, there was no support system, nothing like that for sign language in the country. So communication is our biggest barrier. When the deaf child grows up, he becomes like 5, 6 or 7. That is the time when he joins a school, the deaf schools, and that is when his language begins. So the critical period is already lost. But the problem is that teachers themselves again don't sign in the schools. They practice oralism, speech therapy, and all those things. So teachers, I mean, they don't, in turn, the kids are teaching the teachers sign language. The teachers are supposed to teach them sign language, teach them maths, English, basics, anything. But 90 to 95% teachers don't teach in sign language. That's why kids can't write, and there are only very few people who have had the access of quality education in India. From the very school till the age later on, deaf people have to take up their role of being the leaders and learn for themselves. I feel bad about it. For example, I have two hearing kids. They can write, they can do anything. Like, they're kids like 15 to 18, and I see them, they're doing so much better. But when I was like their age, I did not have the same kind of access. I did not understand the same kind of access. So in National Association of the Deaf, we started in 2005, and that's what we started advocating. I saw so many people there, and I started learning from the deaf community. And now what we have to get is Indian Sign Language to be recognized, to become an official language, and get a respect in the Indian Constitution. So that is what we want. It has to be in the Indian Constitution. So right now we have 22 official languages. So Indian Sign Language must become the 23rd official language. I'll tell you more about this. UNCRPD, just hold on for a moment. Something has happened.
What is it?
Hello, you may continue. I think it's fine right now.
Okay.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. So Indian Sign Language has to go in the constitution related to UNCRPD. Indian government has ratified United Nations Conventions for Persons with Disability in 2007. It clearly mandates that sign language is equivalent to any other spoken language. So similarly, even in the RPWD Act of 2016, we have used the same definition in communication. And NAD recently, we had written to the Home Ministry. We had asked them, the Home Ministry has discussed it with us, and they've said, throughout the deaf community, we've written so many letters to them, and they have accepted our letter, and they have given us this answer that yes, we will give recognition, but they have used sign language. We want to use Indian Sign Language. So sign language as a term, maybe they might just say American Sign Language is also sign language, Japanese Sign Language is also sign language. We don't want to create that confusion in India. We want to have our own Indian Sign Language recognized, become official language, and have an equal kind of a respect. So that is what we are advocating for now. I'll give you one simple example. So many hearing people, there are so many languages, like there is this language called Bodo. So Bodo speaking people are 1 million. Then there is this language called Jogri. Dogri speaking people are 2.3 million. Mithili, this is one language. This language speaking people are 15 million, and deaf people are 18 million. We are the most populous, and we need the language right. So we are now advocating with the government. We are now putting pressure on the government. And recently also I got to know that Home Ministry themselves, they said NAD has been requesting for Indian Sign Language. So Home Ministry has written to ISLRTC, Indian Sign Language Research and Training Center, to their office to see if they should put sign language or Indian Sign Language. They have responded that it should be Indian Sign Language, and they have given their response. I'm quite hopeful. At NAD, we believe that government will take that process and they will give us the recognition and approve it to be an official language. Once it becomes an official language, we'll have immense opportunities. We'll be counted in the census. Sign language will become one of the language in mother tongues under the census in the next coming census, and it will automatically gain a lot of respect. Australia has this same, UK has this thing, the same thing, but in India we don't have it. So census is going to happen in 2021. So we have to plan to do this before that. Second benefit that its official status will help, which is the biggest benefit, education. Right now in India, the teachers in school only practice oral method with children, and children do not get any benefit out of that. They can't write, they can't read, and so many lives are lost. So once Indian Sign Language becomes an official language, it will automatically force all the teachers to use Indian Sign Language. There will be news and TV, anything for that matter, interpreters everywhere, communication access will be clearer. Third benefit, it will give deaf people more job opportunities in universities, in college, teachers everywhere. So that hearing people will also see that this is a respected language. Accessibility, in ICT, in communication technology. Right now, technology is like the boon. We want to push it, and technology will also help us all in ICT specifically. So we really, I would need your support, that the government supports Indian Sign Language to become an official language. I do believe in the process. I don't know how long is it going to take, and it's been long. We started fighting in November 2019, and since then we've been doing, but due to the COVID, the process has slowed down. But we believe in God, and we know that this will come through. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Narayanan sir. Thank you. It's high time that we recognize Indian Sign Language as an official language. Hopefully it will happen soon. We all are with you in this. Thank you. So now,
thank you.
Anybody who wants to ask a question may raise hand. You can click on the raise hand button. Or you may type your question in the chat box. You can switch on the video when you want to ask a question, or any comments. I don't see it yet. I guess Pallavi at some point did mention about, if somebody can. Okay, Abhishek Sharma has a question here. How do we solve the problem of interpretation? Abhishek, would you like to explain the question a bit? What do you mean by interpretation, as in the absence of interpreters? And whom is this question addressed to? Mohammed Faizan asks, which kind of method we used at the time of teaching TEL? Faizan, again, if you could specify. Abhishek says, to explain the language to the young people, how do we solve the problem of interpretation? So maybe Narayanan sir, if you could take this question. Imtiaz sir, if you want to take this, followed by Narayanan sir.
Sanchita, I've asked him to start his video, Narayan
Okay.
sir, but I think it's
Sure.
not
So maybe Imtiaz sir can take it and Narayanan sir can then join.
What was the
Yeah.
question? I just missed out that.
No problem. So it is, how do we solve the problem of interpretation? How do we explain the language to the young people?
The interpretation question comes not with the Divyang people. The interpretation question comes with regard to the.
Sorry, sir, you're not audible. I think it's the bandwidth. Sir.
I was saying that the interpretation part comes with regard to the setting in which you are using the language, not with regard to the sign people. See, interpretation has its own problematic. In a typical legal setting, interpretation also has a problem of subjectivity. And this is a problem that people have been talking about. With regard to sign language, I think it's more of a question of translating it, or I just can't be very clear about this question of interpretation with regard to sign language. Maybe Narayan can tell me better.
Sure. Narayanan sir, if you could take it from here.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So you want to ask about interpreters, right?
How do we explain language to people who cannot hear?
Just one moment. Just one moment. You can't see me. Just give me one moment.
Okay, no problem.
So I have given him the spotlight, so I think he'll have to pin your video.
I see.
Yeah, now it's clear. Now it's clear. Okay. So interpreters vary. You know, signing vary from interpreters to interpreters. Okay. For example, I'll give you one simple example. Hearing people who think that, you know, this person knows sign language and they say, "Acha, tumhe sign language aata hai," they may become an interpreter. But when a deaf person is coming for a conference or anything for that matter, for whom you're calling the interpreters, you ask the deaf person that this is the person I want, this is the skilled interpreter, and this is the person I'm comfortable with. So then they can understand the signing of the interpreter. This is a very big problem. I'll give you a very simple example. Right now, ISLRTC, Indian Sign Language Research and Training Center, has set up. And I go to ministry meetings and everything, they themselves don't place interpreters. And I get so upset that, you know, they don't place interpreters. And then I ask them that what happened and I send them an SMS. Then, so I'm like, you are ISLRTC, you are the training center and you yourself are not providing. And then I have to wait for 30 minutes and then my meeting starts. So this is like a big problem with, you know, respecting the identity, respecting the communication needs of the of the interpreters, and also providing the names in advance that this is the interpreter preference I have. So we have 18 million deaf people, and quality interpreters, I'll say just be 250 to 300. So it's a huge gap that needs to be filled, and I'm hopeful that in future it'll get better.
Right. Thank you so much. The next question is, do we know any agencies that can help specially abled apply for jobs and guide companies to have certain infrastructure in place to accommodate them? Pankaj sir, would you like to take this question?
As such, I am not aware of the agencies, but earlier there were employment exchange and all. See, nowadays guidelines are there, right, to set up infrastructure. Like for accessibility, there are guidelines. For other facilities also, we have there are government guidelines which the companies are supposed to follow. So if person with disability, it depends that whether they want to apply for government jobs or private jobs. In private jobs, anyway, you have to apply through the same process. Likewise, in the government jobs, agencies, government agencies themselves advertise the vacancies. So as such, there is no specific nodal agency which coordinates the employment of persons with disabilities.
Any other questions if anybody would have? I think the idea is to assert your need, assert your right wherever you go. And as you apply, of course, we are yet to have those kind of agencies that would help you with the process. But you do have lawyers, you do have other bodies to help you take it up and through advocacy or strategic litigation and get over the barriers. Question to Narayanan sir, along with ISL recognition, important to encourage deaf teachers in all schools. Narayanan sir, if you could address the issue of encouraging deaf teachers in all deaf schools.
Yes, I agree that deaf teachers must be there, but they have to go through B.Ed HI, and that is not an oral based course. So that has to include ISL. So I am planning to advocate on that also. Thank you. This is a very good question.
Right. I don't see any more questions unless there are comments or anything you would want to say. We can unmute you. It's 7:09, I think. One more, early intervention for deaf. Need ISL right from beginning. So I think that is all. Otherwise, language deprivation. Thank you, Pallavi. Thank you for making those very, very important points here. We really need to do something about it to have Indian Sign Language right from beginning. So I think it's time to close the session. Abhishek Sharma has in the question, what Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment doing to establish and maintaining the special schools and colleges and universities? So the new Act, RPWD Act 2016, provides for inclusive education. So the idea is to have, not to have special schools, but to have an integrated education system that is yet to develop in India. There's no pathway that has been created so far. There's a gap between Right to Education Act and the requirement under RPWD Act. So we still have a lot to see in this regard, a lot to work on, in fact. So that's all. Thank you everyone for making this session so amazing. Thanks for coming. See you in the next session. Bye. Take care.
Thank you very much.
So much. Ragini? Ragini?